A recent Daily Caller investigation shed more light on the cozy ties between big tech and the intelligence community. Daily Caller scoured through LinkedIn to see how many former FBI, DOJ, DHS, and CIA employees were hired by big tech social media companies like Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And the number they uncovered so far is 248 people between the years of 2018 and 2022. And the jobs these former agents took at social media companies have titles such as embedded security manager, senior director, security specialist, director of corporate security and risk, and director of corporate resilience, whatever that means. Here to discuss is whistleblower Steve Friend, former FBI and author of True Blue, My Journey from Beat Cop to Suspended FBI Whistleblower. Steve is actually quoted in the Daily Caller investigation as saying, there has been an enormous spike in big tech hiring of former FBI employees beginning in 2018. I think it is important because it was around this time we saw a lot of the censorship of conservative accounts. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Kim.
So let's talk about this censorship of these conservative accounts. We're seeing this influx of these police type people, FBI, CIA, DOJ, going into social media. Those jobs, those titles, are those the censorship titles that we're seeing now come, now we're seeing that big tech has been censoring quite a bit?
Well, certainly the job titles are not really very descriptive of anything particular that they would be doing. And it's not unusual for somebody to transition from government service to the private sector after having served a full career. But to me, and even doing my own independent research on this, was part of this piece that came through the Daily Caller, there was just this enormous spike. It seemed to be a few hirings here and there for the last years leading up to 2018. But in 2018, there was an enormous jump, and they were people that were high-ranking executives within the FBI, the CIA, Homeland Security, who were 3-4 years from cashing in on a pretty lucrative pension. So in order to make that decision, to me, it meant that there was a significant financial incentive for them to do that, and that they might also be doing something that their subject matter of expertise, being in the executive role that they were in, it was going to bode well for both the government and for social media.
So these people they went to these big tech companies before they retired, not after. Why would they do that? Why would they go before retirement rather than after retirement? It seems like you'd wait, then collect your pension, your retirement, and then go work for big tech, especially if it's only a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not privy to their contracts for hiring, but it would have to be pretty high in order to forego the benefits of that. And then not just that, but the esteem of having retired a full term of service to your country and run that race all the way through was obviously something that I wasn't able to do. It's a tremendous honor to having on your wall that plaque that says that you were a retired special agent with the FBI. So for them to do that, I think that the financial reward had to be there. And I think there's also an aspect to it that allows both the government and the private sector big tech companies to play sort of this accountability hot potato. And because these folks were in high executive roles with the FBI or the Homeland or CIA, they had the institutional knowledge, they had the connections with people who they would come up through the ranks with, who were people who are going to still be there, not having moved on and gone off on their own. And so there was tremendous value to having them actually leave a few years before their predetermined retirement.
Okay, so two questions pop in my head when I hear this, because it is just so odd to leave your job a couple of years before retirement. You would get a pension, you would get the retirement, and then you would still collect the big tech money. So I don't understand this unless, one question, is it possible, and I don't know if this is, so maybe you could answer it, is it possible that they would work both jobs? Are they able to work on the public front, be like, yeah, I transitioned over to big tech, I'm with big tech, but secretly be still working for the government? Is that possible?
Not in any sort of official capacity, but I think that you can. It doesn't take a lot of conspiratorial minds to come up with an idea where somebody moves on to the private sector, but because they still have relationships with people back in their prior government post, they can sort of help them navigate around the hurdles that they might need to get through through subpoena processes or search warrant processes. But as we came to find out, especially from Meta, there was an operation that the FBI was running called Operation Bronze Griffin, where confidential human sources were providing private information from the accounts back to the FBI without those subpoenas and search warrants that are supposed to be issued. And they were doing it sort of in this capacity as an informant. And that is a
Right.
that's a hack around due process.
But again, you could be an informant after you've retired. I mean, you're still going to have those relationships and those connections inside of the FBI or the DOJ or the CIA. So that doesn't, okay. So what about, is it possible that I'm just trying to figure out why they would do this right before they would retire. It just seems so odd. Do they lose some kind of security clearance once they retire? Is there like, once you retire and you no longer get access to these files, that if you don't retire for whatever reason, you would still have access to them?
Well, when you leave the agency, it's need to know, so you don't need a security clearance. So they would actually be giving that up. I think though the timing of it to me indicates a lot more. 2018, 19, 20. There's two election cycles were in there. It was a very contentious election, midterm, and especially in 2020 presidential cycle. And from what we saw and now in the time since then, there was a lot of censorship that went on social media. And I think going back to what I said before with the accountability, you generate a situation where the FBI says, look, we're not telling them how to run their show. It's a private sector. We're offering suggestions and guidelines. And then you go to the other side and they say, look, we're just following the guidelines that the government lays out before us. We're really not making these decisions. And
Yeah.
that gives plausible deniability to both sides. And as we found out, censorship was rampant across all of big tech and social media.
So they must have just given them a lot of money and said, look, it's worth it for you to leave retirement. Yeah, you're going to give up your pension, you're going to give up all of this, but you're going to get so much more money that you're not going to even miss it. That must have been what they ultimately did. We, of course, can't see their salaries on LinkedIn. Would be nice if they had to disclose that. What do you think the motivation is then for these? I mean, besides money, what's the motivation for, well, it's money obviously on the person that's being recruited to social media, but what do you think the motivation is for social media to bring these people in to these particular jobs? Because really, it's not in the best interest of social media to censor users from a business perspective. They would want lots of different voices, lots of different people, and that brings more to the platform. That's good for business. We know that the censorship was not good for business. It was really at the pressure and the behest of the government. Do you think the government was pressuring these big tech companies to hire these employees? And maybe even the government handpicked some of the employees that would move from from inside of these departments to social media companies?
Well, I think that the folks that were moving on from government service to the private sector, they were holding positions that was very apparent, the sort of connections that they had. And as you climb the rungs of power, certainly there's less and less rungs. It's a smaller and smaller circle. So it's just really the pool of people that you could pull from. They all sort of know each other. They know the inner workings. They have that Rolodex of contact information. I don't know if it would be any particular person who would have any sort of subject matter expertise, because at least in my experience, folks, as they ascend their ladders, they're further and further removed from the actual work that's being done on the ground, and they might not necessarily have it. Essentially, you're paying for their access. So then moving on, and then back to your original question about the benefit for these big tech and the social media companies. I think you have to look to something that Senator Feinstein was talking about when she sort of directed all these CEOs that they needed to take corrective action or the government would. So it might be actually in their best interests to hire on these people, help them tiptoe through the raindrops, if you will, and avoid scrutiny from the government and cooperate with the government. And that is going to allow the government to get the information that it wants, to get the outcomes that it might prefer from elections, and maybe pull the heat back away from these social media companies. No more of the Section 230 pressure all of a sudden that we were hearing so much about before the last presidential cycle. That's kind of fallen by the wayside now that you have a Democrat president.
Yeah, would hate to have something happen to your nice little business, is what the government basically said to these social media companies. So they went and hired a bunch of government people. What else would, if you weren't going to go into social media as one of these security type jobs that they've hired former FBI and CIA, what other jobs do people typically transition out of these departments into prior to this?
Just having a law enforcement background, it bodes really well. A lot of people enter into sort of private investigations. They can do threat assessments. That's something that I looked into even when I left from the FBI. My background, I had information for school security, as we saw in Nashville. That's something that's going to be on the front of everybody's mind now, and that's where people who have tactical experience and law enforcement experience, they can come to the fold. They can identify the problems and really make suggestions to how to beef up security. So that's something, and I think people just always fall back on their skill set. So a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of accountants who are in the FBI. So those people can go back to the private sector, and there's nothing stopping them. At least from what we saw with Tim Tebow, I believe he went to work for KPMG. Or, I'm sorry, Steve D'Antuono. Steve D'Antuono, he went to work from KPMG as a partner.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. People should be able to use their skill set and use it in a capacity that makes sense. And if they're in the security world, then it makes sense for them to move to security. I think the big problem that we have, and I know you've called a lot of attention to this, is just that this has then turned into a different type of security, one that I don't think we really need, which is censoring Americans, right? We got to secure ourselves from the opinions of other Americans. Oh my gosh, because their opinions might sway you to, I don't know, think differently. What a crime. Right?
Yes. We've definitely expanded the definition of threat, and that's gone across the board. There's a lot of mission creep with national security now. As we saw recently with this revelation about the infiltration that's gone on with these Catholic parishes. There's threats around every corner from the FBI's perspective, but unfortunately, I think the threats are people who are maybe objecting to the way that the government's comporting itself, and not necessarily physical threats to people's safety.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I don't know if you know much about, I just saw the reports on this today about the Catholic infiltration, about what were they doing? They were putting FBI informants inside of what, church groups, Bible studies? What were they doing? And what were they looking for?
Well, the original whistleblower disclosure that Kyle Seraphin came out with was this intelligence report from the Richmond division that was about quote unquote radical traditional Catholics who might be prone to become radical extremists because they held these very problematic views about traditional marriage and pro-life and pro-border security. And the FBI said, look, it's a low-level employee, low-level analyst. This didn't meet our exacting standards. We've corrected the problem. Well, now it's come to find out that they lied about that, and they're willing to really go down to some pretty deep depths of deception. And they were actually tasking, there was an operation in place where they assigned an undercover agent to infiltrate these Catholic parishes to perform what is called a Type 5 assessment, which is them assessing whether or not anybody there could be recruited to be a paid or maybe a voluntary informant on the FBI's behalf to inform on any radicalization that might be going on. So essentially asking people to inform on their fellow parishioners because they might hold beliefs that the government deems to be problematic and radical, and those being pro-life, pro-marriage, pro-border security, which are legitimate beliefs that large swaths of the country holds. But now that the FBI is deeming these to be problematic, I think it spells some problems for a lot of people around the country.
Did they ever do this sort of infiltration or looking for informants when it came to child molestation accusations inside of the Catholic Church? Or did that just get, oh yeah, no, we'll just we'll investigate those as people come forward saying that they've been molested? I mean, it's like, where are the priorities with this?
Well, certainly they're now focused a lot of resources on domestic terrorism, as they call it. And if you look at the top four priorities that the National Security Branch listed, two of them are radical anti-government extremism and radical ethnic extremism, specifically white supremacy. Well, the President of the United States called anybody who voted Republican a white supremacist and a anti-government extremist. Right. So now the guns have been turned around on about half the country who decided to pull the lever for a GOP nominee for office. And it's just a further indication that the FBI has become this political weaponized arm of the administration now, and is no longer doing the work of all the American people. It's just doing the call from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah, this new revelation that they were spying on Catholics inside the Catholic Church is actually, I mean, freedom of religion is under attack in this country at this point. I'm not a religious person anymore, but I appreciate the ability for people to practice their religion as they choose, and they shouldn't be called terrorists because they hold a belief that might be very conservative to some. And that is really an enormous attack, and that should make everybody in every religion worry that they're being spied on now by the U.S. government. This should be not just Catholics, but if you are any religion at all, if you are Mormon, if you are Protestant, whatever you might be, if you're a Scientologist, a Jehovah's Witness, you know that they're spying on you, that they're looking at you, wondering, what is it you're up to? What kind of belief do you have that is counter to whatever it is that they think you should be thinking or believing? I mean, that is really, truly outrageous that they're spying on Catholics inside of the Catholic Church. That's what they did to Muslims. They would say, oh, we've got to spy on the Muslims in the mosques because there might be a terrorist in there.
Exactly.
And now they've taken that exact operation and moved it to other churches. And that's the way it works. If they're going to do it to one, they're going to do it to you. You just wait.
Yes, I'm glad you pointed that out about the Muslim Americans. That's something that folks on the left have been reporting about for decades, really since 9/11. Trevor Aaronson's done some pretty heavy lifting on that. He wrote about Terror Factory, where the FBI was essentially creating cases and entrapping Muslim Americans who were not predisposed to commit any sort of terrorist act. And we all kind of just shrugged our shoulders at the time, much to our own shame in that. But now it's a reminder that the Nehemiah poem about first they came for the trade unionists and I said nothing. Well, now they're coming for the largest sect of Christianity in this country. And if nobody steps up at this point, who knows who's next?
Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find your book?
Right now it's on pre-sale. It'll be coming out in June. It's on Amazon. True Blue, my journey from beat cop to suspended FBI whistleblower. You can also look for it at Barnes & Noble. I believe Target has it. But obviously Amazon is the big 600-pound gorilla in the room. So it's easily accessible there.
Right. All right, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim.
All right, guys, we are experiencing out of control inflation, and though the Fed keeps raising rates, it doesn't seem to be working, which means something else could be going on, like a lot of countries dumping the dollar, dumping it back onto our shores. Maybe that's why we're experiencing a bunch of inflation. You know, maybe the world is saying we're done with the dollar. Well, long-term bonds have diminished in value. Banks are going under. Depositors are holding their breath. Investors are bailing on bank stocks. Diversification has never been more important. The recent surge in gold prices is directly tied to the extreme market volatility right now, and this is why gold has historically been a great hedge against the stock market and against inflation. So now would be a great time to diversify into gold with Birch Gold Group. Birch Gold makes it easy to convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in precious metals. Here's what you need to do. Visit birchgold.com/Kim to get your free info kit on gold, and they're going to help you convert your existing IRA or 401k that's tied to that volatile market out there into an IRA in precious metals that's gold and silver, and it's all tax sheltered. So visit birchgold.com/Kim to get your free info kit on gold today.